Good morning, everyone. For Telesur, I'm Cody Weddle in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin this morning with a significant development in the investigation into 43 missing students in Mexico. Forensic experts have found the remains of one of the 43 missing students from Ayotzinapa. Argentine forensic experts officially identified the remains of Alexandra Mora. Attorney General Jesus Murillo says it confirms the confessions by detainees that the students were killed and the remains burnt to ashes. International forensic scientists have been examining remains found in mass graves and garbage dumps in Guerrero State. Speaking on behalf of the parents of the 43 missing Ayotzinapa students, Felipe de la Cruz said that protesters need to radicalize their movement. He suggests that they should take up arms since the protests have not led to any result. De la Cruz adds that the group no longer recognizes the government of President Enrique Peña Nieto. After over 2 months of protesting with very little headway by authorities to locate the disappeared students, some of the parents have warned that protests would become more intense. And massive protests continued throughout the weekend in Mexico. During a rally in the capital on Sunday, 12 people were identified as infiltrators in the crowd. They were caught asking for donations but were detained after they refused to identify themselves. One of them confessed to being a Mexico City police officer and another an army soldier. They also admitted that they were paid to commit acts of vandalism but did not reveal by whom. Protesters tied their hands and turned them over to human rights observers. And just north in the United States, protests there also heated up over the weekend after a grand jury decided not to indict a New York City police officer who choked a black man to death earlier this year. New York police arrested over 200 protesters after thousands took to the streets over the court's decision. Protests turned violent in Berkeley and Oakland in California and also in Seattle, Washington. Protesters threw rocks at police officers as they attempted to block highways. People across the country took over department stores and public spaces to protest police oppression of African Americans. President Obama has remained largely silent about the wave of protests and racial tensions across the country, but in a recently leaked interview with Black Entertainment Television, he told American audiences the issue of racism is, quote, deeply rooted in society and in the country's history. He also adds that activists should keep pressing steadily in their demands for reform aimed at ending police brutality against minorities.
Interacted with an individual named Eric Garner.
Moving on to Yemen now. U.S. troops have failed in their attempts to free 2 hostages being held by the militant group Al-Qaeda. The special forces stormed a building where the hostages were being held. 13 people died in the rescue mission, including the 2 hostages, a woman and a 10-year-old boy. The U.S. special forces killed several Al-Qaeda members but failed to rescue American journalist Luke Summers and South African teacher Pierre Corky. U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel defends the operation and says missions such as these will continue.
Since I was kidnapped in Sana'a. Basically,
Israeli warplanes have attacked 10 targets in 2 areas near the Damascus International Airport and in the town of Damascus. There are no reports of deaths or injuries. The sites are suspected Hezbollah weapons dumps. Israeli officials have not commented on the attacks. The Syrian government called the airstrikes an act of direct aggression. Syrian officials sent a letter to UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and called on the Secretary Council to condemn the attack and impose punitive actions on Israel due to its alleged support of Syrian terrorist organizations. And now to Ukraine, where clashes continue in the eastern region of Donetsk. On Sunday, heavy shelling was reported near the international airport. The armed confrontations caused severe damages to residential areas near the airport. That's despite a September 5th truce and a renewed call for a ceasefire last week. The UN reports that the conflict has led to more than 4,000 deaths. Now to the Philippines, reeling from the effects of Typhoon Hagapit. The storm tore through the country's central islands, leveling homes, uprooting trees, and downing power lines. Nearly 1 million people were evacuated from their homes. The Philippine Red Cross reports 21 deaths as of this Monday. The nation was devastated last year by Super Typhoon Haiyan, which killed nearly 7,000 people. Hagapit was downgraded to a tropical storm before it hit land. Turning back to Latin America and to Lima, Peru. That's where the United Nations Climate Change Conference continues. Yesterday, 8 Latin American countries presented a major program to recover 20 million square kilometers of forest in the continent. The plan was announced by Mexico, Colombia, Costa Rica, Salvador, Ecuador, Guatemala, Peru, and Chile. They say the goal is to start the program before 2020. Experts estimate that about half of the 4,200 tons of greenhouse gases produced by Latin America are the consequence of the wrong use of land and the loss of forests. Member states of the Caribbean community began meeting with the government of Cuba and Havana this weekend for the 5th Cuba-CARICOM Summit. The talks were expected to focus on economic and trade relations. Today, the summit will give leaders an opportunity to evaluate the trade and economic agreement, which was signed in 2000. The Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonsalves, condemned what he called the criminal economic blockade imposed by the U.S. almost 6 decades ago against Cuba. Heads of state began to arrive in Mexico Sunday to participate in the 24th edition of the Ibero-American Summit to be held in the southeastern state of Veracruz today and tomorrow. The meeting will focus on education, innovation, and culture. The conference also seeks to focus on improving Latin America's regional education system. The summit has experienced declining influence in recent years, largely due to the emergence of separate regional integration blocs such as UNICER, ALBA, and CELAC. Six men held for more than a decade at the U.S. military prison at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, were flown to Uruguay for resettlement on Sunday. It marks the latest step in a slow-moving push by President Obama's administration to close the facility. The release of 4 Syrians, a Tunisian, and a Palestinian represented the largest single group to leave the internationally condemned U.S. detention camp since the year 2009. Obama promised to shut the prison when he took office nearly 6 years ago, but any move has been partially blocked by the U.S. Congress. Plenty more on those stories and others at our website, telesurtv.net/English. For Telesur English, I'm Cody Weddle. Hope you have a great Monday and a great week.